Welcome to the Gen Z Stoic Podcast,
where every week we strive to lead younger generations on a path to virtue through the insight of Stoic teachings and personal stories from our lives as Gen Z Stoics.
Welcome back to the Gen Z Stoic Podcast. I am your co-host, Mateo.
And I am your co-host, Ren. And with us today, we have Benny Voncken. Benny is the co-host of the Street Stoics Podcast and a co-founder of Via Stoica, a Stoic life coaching agency. Benny has a lot of perspective on Stoicism, and we're very excited to have him here today. So, Benny, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Mateo and Ren, for having me. I'm looking forward to this lovely conversation here on Stoicism and how it affected our lives. Let's see what we can get out of it.
Right. And Stoicism affecting our lives, that's where we like to start. So the first question we ask everybody is, how did Stoicism become an influence in your life? And, when did you really recognize that, wow, I'm living a lot of these Stoic values and I may not even know it?
Yeah, that's a great point to start. And it's also a lovely conversation to have with people who go on this journey to kind of pinpoint that moment where they need something more in life, right? And as you pointed out, we have like many conversations on X with people and they come familiarized with Stoic philosophy and they say that exact thing, right? They say like, oh, I was a Stoic and I didn't even know it. And especially because Stoicism has this kind of negative connotation where it's like to be this rock, that shun out all your emotions, and that's not what it is. So as people see what it really is, they start to embrace it more, and so did I, right? And a lot of people, they go on as like, I needed it in the moment when I was at my lowest, right? When you just go through some really deep things, like I went through my relationship, my marriage went downhill, which ended up in a divorce. I busted up my knee, which pretty much stopped me from playing soccer or football. And then we had the COVID pandemic and all of that stuff. So I really needed something to ground me, to give me that foundation to work through all those things. And that's where I started. I started reading a lot. So as I went through all of these things, I gave myself some rules because, when you go through difficult things, it's easy to grasp on stuff that kind of help you. So I told myself no alcohol because that wasn't really helping me at all. I started reading more, started doing more physical fitness, just taking care of myself, doing the things that I really wanted to do, like playing more football. Well, that didn't last long, but hey, that's life. But so I started doing all those things, and as I started reading more, I kind of, for me, at one point, I diagnosed myself with an existential crisis. I picked up a great book called Introduction to Existentialism, and that's where I started really noticing the Stoics more, right? I've read them before, but now they really jumped out of the page, and they really spoke to me. So I just went full on. I just started reading everything I could about Stoicism. I started writing about it on my blog. First, it was called the Stoic Padawan, which as a Star Wars aficionado, I was just thrilled that name was still available. So I started writing there, and just to kind of galvanize these thoughts better, to make them mine and to really get them on paper. And two reasons I started the blog was, first, if you write to a public, you need to think about things a little bit more. So you need to make it more cohesive. If I write for myself, it just becomes gibberish. But if I write for someone else, I try to make it a little bit more cohesive. And second, it was just a matter of putting it out there and being criticized, because that's something I had difficulty with, criticism, negative feedback. So I figured the best way to just deal with it is just to put yourself out there and get it. And that really helped me as well. So that was kind of how I started on the journey. And I really felt home with it. And I went all in, and it gave me so much self-confidence and introspection that now I feel like, yeah, bring it on. I can deal with most of the things, hopefully. Hopefully, let's see if I don't want to call fortune upon me, but let's see what comes.
I think a lot of the common denominator between all of those things that happened, right? I mean, COVID and the injury and the things you listed, were they were things that happened to you. They weren't things that you could really control. They were kind of, an outside external factor in your life. And then all these things that you started listing off are actions that you took to better yourself that already came from within yourself. So where did you realize that when dealing with these things that happen to you, instead of looking for an external solution, when did you realize that you really had to take a look internally?
Yeah, and I have a great example for that. And that's one of the things that really opened my eyes to the practicality of Stoicism. I was at the moment at that in Dubai. I was teaching English, and there's a lot of different people you work with. The students were difficult, but I also had some colleagues who were just just trying to, just frustrating things that they just playing games or whatever. And then I read this quote by Marcus Aurelius. It said, that person is bound to act that way. It's like secreting juice from a fig tree, right? And by the way, soon you'll both be dead, soon forgotten, right? So, and I went back to work that the next day, and I saw the same colleague, and he was up to his same little things, just making snide remarks here and there, and then I figured, like, if I get angry at him, it's like me getting angry at the fig tree being sticky. So it's not up to me to change that person, but it's up to me to change how I deal with that person. And that changed things completely. That just looked. I felt myself kind of taking a step back out of the moment, looking at the situation as like, what's really happening here. And the great thing is you can apply this with everything, right? You can apply this with all the things. Like if you go to the supermarket, or if you drive around, on the freeway, and people doing things, like, you can't control them, but I can control how I drive. So for example, if I see something happening, I can slow down or maybe speed up a little bit just to get ahead of it. Or if I see someone making strange moves, I don't have to react on it, right? I can just make sure that I'm calm and I keep things safe. That's under my control. But if I get frustrated, then that's up to me. That's pretty much up to me. So that's where I saw the practicality in a really life event that I had. And then I just extrapolated it, and then I just took everything that I read from that point of view. So like, how can I use this? Like every single quote, every single thing is like, how can I use this to make my life easier? So that's like how I kind of took it from the text, from my life, and just combined it all together.
I think one thing that both Matteo and I have noticed in our journeys with Stoicism is it is about that practical application. Simplicity and practicality are two of my favorite things about Stoicism. But then once you like go and actually apply it, then like you said, it kind of galvanizes it within you. And I also like how you mentioned, when you're writing, it becomes like real. And so we've definitely noticed that hosting this podcast is it's like, all right, we actually have to think about like we have to live what we teach. I think there's an element of that as well. And it's kind of that taking responsibility, right? If you have this public forum, you're illustrating these values and the benefits of them, you better be living them. And so I love that you mentioned that. And another thing with taking responsibility is once, like you said, those external things happen to you, I think there's a separation that we must make. And I'm interested to see your opinion on this, between the external event itself, right? Those people, the traffic, if you stub your toe or something, and then our reaction to it. So it's not taking responsibility for other people's actions, but taking responsibility for our reactions.
Yeah, and responsibility is a massive thing, right? Responsibility is something that I didn't take, and it kind of comes into that victimhood mentality. And I wrote about that as well on the blog, and it's called "Why Me? Why Not Me?" And before I had this attitude, before I took responsibility of my life, I had this attitude is like, things are happening to me, and look how pity myself, and look how sad I am that all these things are happening to me, and I've got such a sad life going, I can't do anything about it. And then I read this quote, which was really great, because I love freedom, right? And I love freedom, but what does that really mean? And I read this quote, and it's often attributed to Freud. It goes, most people don't want, because freedom requires taking responsibility, and most people are afraid of responsibility. Because if you take full responsibility for your life, then everything that happens is on you, right? Everything that happens is your fault, or your wrong decision, or your right decision. So everything falls on you. And when you talk about that external and internal world, right, where I take responsibility for my life, that means that I need to make sure that I am my best self, that I lived a good life. No one else is going to do that for me. There's not someone who's going to show up and say, hey, you know what, Benny, let me just help you and make your life perfect. No, people are inherently focused on themselves, which isn't bad, right? And sometimes Stoicism gets a bad rap for being, selfish and egocentric. But if you can't make yourself the best person, and how can you help other people? And I think, what you guys doing here with the podcast, and it does make you more aware of what you say and how you really live it. And, because I have that question often where I think of myself, like, am I a hypocrite, going on podcasts and writing and on all these spaces to say all this great stuff? Am I really living it? So that keeps me honest, and that keeps me going. But it is important to see that part of it, where you have the external and the internal, and it is all our choice to really live. If you want to live a good life, then you've got to do it.
Well, I like what you said about being a hypocrite, because that's something that a lot of faces on the internet or podcasts won't talk about, right? It sucks kind of going through life and you make mistakes when you're preaching something, and then you kind of act in the opposite way. You make a mistake and you're like, well, somebody sees that, they could definitely use it against me. But overall, right, and I can probably speak for all of us here, we've seen the overall trajectory of our lives and our actions steadily improve as we continue to practice and read and teach and learn about Stoicism specifically. But then I like what you said about how some people think it's very egocentric to work on yourself all the time, and how people think that it's a selfish thing. But I would say there's a Stoic quote that kind of combats that by saying if you don't understand how beneficial it is, and if you don't really understand the delight that you can get from working on yourself and truly making improvements, you're not really going to understand. And it comes from Epictetus. He says, just as one person delights in improving his farm and another in his horse, so I delight in attending to my own improvement day by day. And right and there, he's actually quoting Socrates. He's talking about something that Socrates said. But that quote, that what really stands out is how he delights in attending to his own improvement. And so when you see people saying how it's egocentric and it's selfish and you're not focused on anybody else, would you agree? And what would you say to those people who haven't really found, the joy and the true satisfaction in getting those long-term results from self-improvement?
Yeah, and that's an ongoing discussion. Although I'm on the side of first helping yourself. It's like that oxygen mask story in airplanes, right? You put it on yourself first, and I think that is key, because if you don't even know who you are, and if you don't have that strong foundation within yourself, like think about it as a house, right? You have a foundation that a home is built on, and the stronger the foundation, the taller the house can be, and the taller or wider the house can be, the more it can help people or give people a roof over their head. So I think that is really important as well for us to have that strong foundation and to have that peace. And it's not even just about, and people talk about, you have to help others, you have to be there for others. Yes, you do, right? But it doesn't mean always physically. Sometimes the best way to show or help people is to give them the right example. Like, this is the way to live. This is how if you want to have this peaceful life, maybe try to get rid of a few things, maybe focus more on yourself, maybe see really what's going on in yourself that really hurts you, right? Because when we talk about that, the feeling hypocrite, and then you have that imposter syndrome, which we all go through. If you create something, it's like, who am I to talk about this stuff? But if you don't do the work, then you are, in my opinion, you're more of a hypocrite, right? If you don't really do the work yourself. And I'm not saying that you have to be perfect, because we're not, right? But as long as you're trying, as long as you're doing your best to improve and to get better, and then it trickles down. Okay, so yeah, it trickles down, right? So if you really work on yourself, like there's these circles by Heracles. I always get his name wrong. Heracles, the circles of Heracles, where the self is in the center, and then it moves outwards: family, friends, society, community, the world, right? Because we are, at the end of the day, part of the world. So if we work on ourselves, and if we set a good example, if we are good and kind to ourselves, compassionate, then we can also express that same thing to other people around us. Set the right example, and then they can live the good life as well that hopefully we are working towards.
There's certainly a phenomenon that we've talked about with past guests for people who are on the self-mastery journey and they want to share it. It's that when you work on yourself and you get to a point where you're content and you're happy, it's not something that you want to keep to yourself. It's something that you want to share. And you've talked about with us the spaces on X and these Facebook groups where you have a lot of people who are in the so-called Stoic community who are sharing these things. And I think it's a product of that, where once you get to a point where you're content and you're taking responsibility in a lot of these core Stoic concepts, where you eventually feel fulfilled and you feel like you can handle most things that life throws at you, you don't want to say, all right, I'm good. Now I'm just going to, I'm going to go fall off the face of the map. No, you say that, if everybody could feel like this, society would be so much better, and I want to share that. And so that's my response to whenever somebody says like Stoicism is an inherently selfish and egocentric, as you mentioned, school of philosophy, is that it's not. Because when you are serving yourself in terms of becoming a better person, you're also serving society, because the product of you being a better person is you being a better member of society. I think that's something that people often overlook, is because they haven't, like Matteo said, felt the delight of working on themselves and becoming content. once you get to that point, you're like, oh, this isn't selfish whatsoever. Now I get to go share this journey.
Yeah, exactly. And it does help you kind of separate things a little bit, because again, we can't control the opinions and the actions of others, right? But we can kind of nudge them, or give them at least the good example of what it is. And the more you study, again, this is also the more you read, the more you investigate in this, the more I realize, at least, all the things I don't know. So that keeps me sharp as well. So apart from just sharing things with others, it's also good to get input from others. And then you hear things, especially on those Facebook groups. Some people, they go a little bit too overboard, and where I ask myself is like, do you really practice what you preach? Like some people are very nasty there with the comments. It's like, it's fine. I need that, but it could use a little bit of temperance. But then there are, and this is how I kind of change my view set to like feedback, whether it's positive or negative. I always try to see if there's something that I can learn. So even if people are, just like attacking me with whatever verbal force they have, and especially on the Facebook groups, they can get a little bit, harsh with their verbal force, and ask like if they really do that. But the more we learn, the more we know that we don't know. I think that is important to always keep in mind, and to always keep practicing, and to keep studying more. And the more we do that, at one point it becomes this kind of a sense of duty, at least in my opinion, to share this with others, as you said as well, right? To make sure that people know about this stuff, and because it's so important, especially, and I feel like I'm getting passionate about it as well as I speak. The more you think it's important, the more it's, you want to share it to other people. So the better you live your life, the more you want to show other people, like, this is possible, right? It's like, I can see you going through difficult things. I can see you going through some rough things, but you can get through it. Just take responsibility, look at your actions, do that introspection, and focus on the right things. Focus on living well and living the way, we all can. Yeah, I think that it is important, right? And that's where that combination comes into play. Like, work on yourself first, and then it feeds back to the rest of the world.
Well, I think too, especially in our society today, because we're such a result-focused society, it's very beneficial when you have taken responsibility and done the work yourself, and you have feasible results that you can show to people and say, no, look, I'm not, just saying this to get your money or just to mess with you. Like, look, it's worked for me. Here are the tips, and you can see the results. I started at A and now I'm at B. Take a look at this. And so I think that's a big deal. And when you have communities where you can learn from, one of my favorite Seneca quotes is, he says that men learn while they teach. So while we're teaching others about Stoicism, we're also learning more about ourselves, because we'll have these, aha moments where we're like, I didn't even connect these two while you're explaining it to someone else. Sometimes it's really just about, the repetition of material and the content that we keep taking in and spewing back out to other people. It's really just about looking at it over and over again. And that's where we really start to learn, is when we make those deeper connections.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings me to when I was teaching English, right? And you don't know a lot of these concepts, and the grammar and all that stuff is difficult. But the more you teach it, the more you explain it, the more you want to know more about it. So that kind of pushes you to learn more. So that is excellent what you mentioned there. It's like, if you put yourself out there, and if you want to become this authority on a topic, then you really want to know everything as much as you can. And you're not going to know everything. And I think that that's also the importance of something like Stoicism, where the most important thing is, again, how it affects your life. And what you mentioned as well is like to apply it. And then it's like to share the things, to share these views and these things. And then you become that teacher, right? And then you teach the people who are just a few steps behind you. And there's always going to be someone who's a little bit further ahead that they can teach you and help you. So yeah, definitely. I think that that's a great point and I love that quote as well, where you learn more when you teach it, when you share your knowledge. And I think that that's also the benefit of, we live in this community, we live in a society, and that's the benefit of having people on different stages to help each other just advance a little bit more.
Yeah, I'll mention Seneca as well, because if I had to pick a favorite Stoic, as our audience would know, Seneca is definitely my favorite. And a lot of the letters he's writing to Lucilius and his letters from a Stoic, you see the theme of you learn to become a good person by modeling yourself after somebody else so that you can serve as a role model as well. And so that's what we see, I think, in a lot of these spaces is even if we aren't perfect, even if we're very imperfect, which a lot of us are, there's still something that we can learn from everybody so that we can then go out and say, all right, well, I've learned this from somebody. Now I can go teach somebody else. And it's kind of this, if I had to think idealistically, this kind of chain where we just, one person teaches the next person, teaches the next person. And that's how we see a society that kind of builds these values. So that's what I really love about these spaces, is that even if we're very critical, which, I'm on Reddit and there's a lot of criticism in the Stoic Reddit where they're like, oh no, your perspective on this is wrong or something like that. And it gets very academic in nature. Even if we're just going back and forth, we are learning through that process. And like you said, it can get a little bit nasty, especially on the internet. There's a few words here and there that they're shared, and it's maybe a little bit more out of anger than out of trying to help or anything. But we still learn and we still progress. And I think that's what's really valuable, even if there are imperfections or you're wrong. It's just learning from all of those things. That's something that's inherently valuable. And I think in Stoicism, where we're certainly more non-reactive than the general public, I would say it's even more valuable, because yes, while there's, like you mentioned, those hateful messages, a lot of that is just truly the pursuit of trying to be better people. And I think that's something that's the marker of philosophy overall, and why I encourage anybody to, like you said, maybe not even Stoicism, but just some sort of philosophy in life, so that you can always have something to achieve and to get better at. And that's just becoming a better person.
Yeah, and I think, when you talk about it becomes too academic, it goes to that ivory tower idea, right? As our philosophy needs to be only done by people who've studied this for years and are doctors and whatever. But then when we really bring it down to when Zeno actually taught, that's why it's Stoicism, right? Zeno taught it in the Stoa Poikile, where it's like this is between the people and among men and all that stuff. So I think that is a good call to make. But yeah, it needs to be practiced, and it needs to be understood, and we need to be able to have that tougher skin when we deal with the people online and all that stuff. So I think that's a really good point to make. And then we can make it our own, and instead of bringing it out of the ivory tower and bringing it to the streets where we should live it, where the people should really put it into application.
I think the biggest thing about Stoicism, and you were sort of touching on this indirectly, is just seeing people overcome with joy when they see other people applying what you've taught them. And I know personally, when I am able to teach somebody a lesson about Stoicism, or when somebody says like, how did you do this, when they're genuinely inquiring about something that I've done, or a way of thinking that I've sort of obtained throughout the years of studying Stoicism. And recently, we're so divided in society, here in America anyway, specifically, and really just in the Western world as a whole. It's very divided on every level. I mean, whether it's politics or like sports teams, it's literally everywhere, super divided. And so having conversations with people who you don't share a common ground with is near impossible, it seems like. I was at church this morning, and the sermon was like the phrase, we'll have to agree to disagree, seems like it doesn't even exist anymore. And I was like, absolutely, it seems like that's very difficult. And so when you have these conversations with people that it seems like you're so far apart on every end of every spectrum, and you're able to set your differences aside and still come to a common ground using Stoic practices like reason and rationale, and being calm, and just not letting your emotions overcome these important discussions, it really progresses and propels the both of you into a better place. And I feel like if our society as a whole were able to sit down and do things like that, we would be far better off.
Yeah, I agree. And that all comes down again, like the more focused we are on ourselves, the more the idea, the better idea that we have of ourselves, then we can also deal with different opinions far better. Right. And I think a lot of this comes from people being insecure, not knowing exactly what to do, not knowing exactly what their values and principles are. And that's where a philosophy of life, asking yourself those questions, being curious about yourself, knowing who you are, again, having that strong foundation will then also guard you better against, different opinions, where you can't say, okay, you know what, I don't agree with you 100% on all these things. I do respect you as a human being and that you have your opinion. But let's agree to disagree. But that can only work from a strong sense of self. If we know who we are, then before this entire journey, if I had this negative feedback, I would have been devastated. I would have been destroyed, because I didn't know where my grounding factors were. And now, it's your opinion. If you have a bad opinion about me, that's great. Whatever. Just tell me what it is. Maybe there's truth in it. Maybe there isn't. So I think that is really, to establish that dialogue again, what you were mentioning, in sports, but in politics, just in general, on all these things. To establish that dialogue, we need to be certain about who we are, and what we do in life. And from that point of view, we can accept other people and other people's views in our lives again.
Yeah, it's another kind of topic where introspection becomes a priority over external dialogue. And I think the introspection aspect, a lot of people when they are starting on this journey, not even philosophically, but of, if we want to call it self-improvement, self-mastery, that's the most uncomfortable factor, is introspection, where you have to kind of just sit there and let your thoughts wash over, and you kind of have to just deal with it, and you have to get through it. So I'm curious to hear kind of your experience. You know, you mentioned with some of the life factors that led you to Stoicism, how that moment was for you and how you push through kind of the uncomfortability of that introspection when you're starting out.
Yeah, and I can take, for example, my journey of quitting alcohol and drinking, becoming sober as an example there, because that's a big obstacle for me, right? And I know that I'm a person, like, if I have one beer or whatever, then it's going to be more, right? It's going to be endless, and it's going to be until I just pass out or whatever. And I've had those experiences, but there's that social aspect that always had me, drive, like, I can't be the only one who doesn't drink, or I have to drink, like all of that stuff. So in that sense, for me, it took, first of all, you need support, right? And this is something, especially among men, I've noticed that with the coaching and with other conversations I've had, it's difficult to ask for help, right? It's difficult to say, hey, I'm struggling with this part. And can you show me the way, or what would you do, or just some small support, or maybe even get some more professional guidance if you need. So I was lucky to have a sister who also quit alcohol, and a cousin who did the same. So that really gave me that sense of, like, that idea is, like, it is possible, right? So sometimes you do need some example, right? Just some support from other people who've gone ahead of you in this journey, what we kind of discussed about. But then it all really stems down as, like, what is important to me? What are my priorities, right? And I made that decision, drinking alcohol is just not good for me, right? And it's a very, detrimental thing for people in their lives, because it's so ingrained in society. If you don't drink, then you don't belong, but it does so much damage, and it did to me. So I figured this isn't good for me, and I can make that decision. I can say, okay, I'm just going to quit this stuff. I'm not going to drink it anymore. Why? Because it's not good for me, and it makes me lose all that reason and logic, right, that I really adhere to. And so I went on that journey for myself after having seen some good examples, and thinking, then having that introspective feeling is like, okay, why am I doing this? Like, why is this important to me? Okay, it gives me clarity. It keeps me under control. I have too much to lose. I've got a lot of good things going on. So then you have that deep introspection. You just sit with yourself. And those are difficult moments, right? Because then you ask yourself, am I going to lose friends? What is the rest of the world going to think about me? So then you start to think about all those external opinions. And at the end of the day, I figured it's like, I don't care, right? I do, I do want to have, my friends and family, but if they don't accept me for who I am, then what good are they, right? Because what are they going to help me? And I'm making right decisions that I feel are good. So at one point you have to let that go. At one point you have to make a decision. It's like, no, I have my reasons why I do that. I know why, because I sat with myself. I asked those questions, and now I'm making the actual changes, right, against that action. And it's going to affect people, right? Because people like to live in this comfortable life where they know exactly what's going to happen. And if you change, if you suddenly show up and you're a different person or acting different, then they're going to be surprised. They're not going to like it all the time, right? And I've had people who shunned me, right? Who said, like, we don't need, let's not invite you anymore. And yeah, that's great. That's fine. I'll just watch some Netflix at home and I'll be perfectly happy. I'll read some book. That's fine with me as well. That's okay. If you can't accept me for who I am, then maybe that's the best way to separate our lives, or to separate our paths. So it does come with that deep introspection, and it's difficult, right? Because you do want to belong, right? And we get a lot of these influences from social media and from all these other things, and we want to belong, right? We want to be part of it, and a lot of it is kind of moving us in that direction. So it is, especially if you're in school, or if you're at work, you do want to be part of the group. And sometimes with Stoicism, sometimes these decisions, they don't go along with the rest of the world, with the entire group, especially if you have your philosophy, and not everybody appreciates you working on yourself. And then, one last example, it's not quite with philosophy, but in this kind of similar idea, when I was in college, and it took me 6.5 years instead of the normal 4, because of, partying, but also work and all that stuff. And at one point I was fed up. It's like, I'm not going to do this anymore. I want to graduate. I want to get this done. I want to continue with my life. So I started really working on it, right? I started really graduating. And then my best friend back in the day, he got angry, right? He's like, yeah, we're supposed to finish this together. It's like, I'm not going to wait for you, right? I need to do this for myself. So I need to make a choice here, or I'm going to stick another year or two, just to be friends, or I'm going to choose for my own way. And I decided I've got to go for my own path. I've got to make my decision, and I've got to go and forge ahead.
Well, I really like what you said about you're kind of left with this decision to make where it's my way or the highway, basically, right? And one thing that, Ren and I both having gone through pretty similar things growing up, similar situations, being in tough mental spots. One kind of the way, at least for me personally, that I found that introspection was being essentially at rock bottom, was really having no way to go but up. You're at the bottom and it's like, well, I can't go further down than I already am. I can't move side to side. Like the only thing I can do is look up and try to keep going. And like you said, we all want to fit in. We all want to be part of something. And so I think it's inherent in our human nature that when we hit rock bottom, most people aren't just going to sit there and quit, right? Most people are going to at least try and move somewhere. Now, whether that might not be in the right direction, it's still better to move somewhere than to stay stagnant, right? And, just try something new. So I guess I want to ask you, did you ever have a moment where you really felt like you were at the bottom, where you had nothing to lose, and you had sort of a turning point where you really realized something had to change or something about yourself that if maybe not for that, deep or really dark spot in your life mentally, that you wouldn't have found out?
Yeah, and there's a lot of moments that I've had where I should have changed far before, right? And again, that comes with this alcohol again, and I've had many moments where I just felt depressed after nights out, and I wasn't a person who drank by myself. Always when I went out, and I just went blackout drunk and waking up places that I didn't even know, hungover, and just feeling bad about myself. Again, I remember after my marriage went downhill and we were separated here and there for a while, and I just went out to drink, and I woke up one morning, having lost my phone and everything was gone. I was feeling horribly physically but also mentally, and I was like, this is not going to be my life. As looked at, well, I was, if I was able to look at the mirror getting up, but I was like, this is not going to be who I am, right? And I've got to make some really tough decisions now, because if I don't, then this is going to be my path. I'm just going to do this. And you can see many examples out there of people who are going to stick on this path and might not even hit rock bottom, as you said, but just kind of hover over it, right? Or maybe they're already there, but they think there's still something lower to go. And then you've got to ask yourself, is this really the quality of life that I want to live? And if for me, I was like, I don't want to struggle this much. And the only reason why I'm struggling is because of me. I'm doing this to me, right? No one else is telling me to go and drink. So I've got to figure out what my problem is and figure out how I can deal with this and really go down to the essence. And sometimes it does require making some drastic decisions. As you said, it's all or nothing, right? Sometimes that is the way to begin. Listen, this is, quoting these, the Senecas and the Epictetuses, that's the easy part, right? But then really putting it into practice, that's where it's difficult. And that's where this kind of your character is shown. Like, who are you, right? Or am I going to be me as a person? And I like the quote by Marcus Aurelius, who says to stand up straight and not straightened. Right, it always makes me physically a little bit, taller and all that stuff. But it's also like, hey, I need to do this, right? Again, this is my life to live, and it's a precious thing, right? We don't know how much we have. We don't know, the time that is gone. But now is the moment to live. Yeah, it does require sometimes this eye-opening moments. But then you have to be, a mix of compassion and stern and hard on yourself to say, I've got to make these changes, and I've got to do it. And there's no easy way around it. You've just got to go ahead and forge ahead.
Yeah, it's something where a lot of people go through life and they don't want adversity to hit them, and they kind of run from adversity. And so when they have challenges, like you said, they fool themselves into thinking like, woe is me, or this isn't a challenge, or whatever they can tell themselves to not have to deal with the situation. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we seek out a cushy life. Now, certainly we don't want to be out there just seeking challenge after challenge, because that's crazy as well. But we have to have this mindset that's very prevalent in Stoicism, where I know Seneca talks about he finds people who never have misfortune as unfortunate because they don't know who they are, and they don't know who they are when they face that adversity. So for all three of us, I feel like I can say that it's the adversity that really built us in this journey, and it's the adversity that kind of pushed us to teach these things. And so I'm just curious on your perspective of that. As you look back on these challenges, would you say now that you're more grateful for them than you were in the moment? And as you've progressed, do you kind of view these challenges more as something that's exciting? Because that's certainly for me something that now that I've read these quotes, like you say, and I get to apply it, whenever something challenging happens, I'm like, oh, I get to prove myself now. It's not like, oh, this sucks, like I hate it, why is this happening to me? It's like, I get to prove myself now, like let's do it.
Yeah, and that is the mindset shift that really, makes your outlook on life different. Now I see, like, my divorce has also been one of the best moments that have happened to me, because I've had to, go back to who I were, create my life again all over from scratch, think about where I want to go and what do I want to do. So those moments are really the moments, like I say, like, if you're at the top of the hill, if you're winning, you're not going to ask yourself the questions like, oh, what should I improve? Like, oh, what should I do better? Right? Just like, yeah, look at me, I'm king of the world. And then it can go down real quick. But if you're at the bottom, you really need to dissect yourself. You really need to take yourself apart and then see, like, okay, where is this, like a well-oiled machine, like a car. You take the engine apart and it's like, where is this friction? Where is it hurting me? And I like that quote that you brought up, by Seneca. That's one of my favorites as well. But then there is also this book by Viktor Frankl. I don't know if you've read it, Man's Search for Meaning, which is great, right? And he talks about, finding your meaning in life in these involuntary discomforts, right? In these involuntary struggles. Like, he was in the concentration camps, but and then there's a small nuance that it has to be involuntary, right? As you said, you don't want to go seek out these things necessarily, but when they are there, you welcome them. It's like, yeah, bring it on. Now I can test myself, and we talked about this earlier. It's like, I can talk the talk, but can I walk the walk, right? And the Stoics at one point, they welcome these things. It's like, yeah, I want to test myself. I want to see how well I'm doing. I want to see where I stand. And and life gives us enough opportunities, right? But if you change that mindset, the funny thing is that these obstacles, they no longer become obstacles, right? Obviously, you have a preferred outcome, but they become this challenge. They become this moment to test yourself. And for me, it's always when Seneca talks about that quote, the ones who've never been unfortunate. If you've never been unfortunate, then even a pebble can make you stumble on your path, right? But the more the higher walls that you've crossed, they're all going to be smaller next, right? Because you've already dealt with one thing. And then the last thing, on this, I think from my side, it also shows you that we have everything in our tool bag, or in whatever bag that we have, to deal with the present moment, because we've dealt with so many present moments already. You've dealt with all these other things. If you got something new, it's like, yeah, I've got the tools. I can deal with this because I've dealt with so many before this already.
Well, like your analogy of the tool bag is good, because even if we're in situations where we feel like we don't know if it's in where to go, we don't know where to look for help, everything we have is already within us. And so it's like with the tool bag, you may you may not have used this tool yet, but you definitely still have it in the bag. You just have to go figure out which one is going to help you in, X situation. There's also in Epictetus's discourses, he mentioned, there's this quote that he has, and I feel like it'd be a modern day David Goggins quote, but just back in the day, where he said, essentially, he just asked the question, how long are you going to wait before you demand the best for yourself? And something about that quote just really makes me think, like, you're sitting down and you're looking at your phone, and then you wake up and you're like, what am I doing? It's just, you have these moments where you're like, my life is wasting away. Marcus Aurelius, he says, you could leave life right now. Your time could end right now. And your example, right? Waking up blackout drunk, not knowing where you were, feeling like garbage. You don't know where your phone is. And you're like, I could leave life right now. Is this really the point that I would want to leave life at, being this person? And so something too, just about, I guess, transformation, like individually, is it's not even about having to, disappear and then come back and be like this completely new person. It really starts with how you interact with other people as well. Because I feel like the people that we hang out with are certainly influencing our situation, right? The 5 people we spend the most time with, we're going to essentially be the sum of those 5 people. So it definitely is going to start with who you're surrounding yourself with and how you're interacting with those people, setting your boundaries with those people, saying, like you said, like, I'm not going to spend another 2 years here, just being friends with you in college. I'm going to go and graduate now because this is what's best for me. Setting those boundaries, interacting with people in a good way, and making sure that, what you need is clear and that you're not going to sacrifice that for somebody else.
And, coming back to that, being the best version of yourself, and, this is the moment to do that. I think it's also very good to identify what that means, right? Just to have the definitions clear for yourself, not just by everybody else. Like we talk about success and failure and riches and all that stuff, but also what does that really mean to be the best version of yourself? And, the Stoics, they boil it down to, being virtuous and living in accordance with your nature, right? That's pretty much it, applying reason and logic and all of those things. And they're great, right? But even them, we need to ask, what does that mean to me? Like, and once you kind of figure that out, then, it's something that is just something that is prolonging, it's on your journey. You always find out that you know something, and then you have a new question. But if you know what is the best version of yourself, and for some people that is, physical exercise, to be physically strong. For other people that is a certain knowledge, a certain job, or a certain thing that they have to work on themselves, right? So I know that, from the people that I spoke with, a lot of people that struggle with anger, right? That's something like I get angry with things. For me, it's temperance. Right, I'm not tempered. I can go all the way in. It's very black and white. It's like all or nothing. So I need to work on those things. So in order to say, like, what is the best for me, you really need to delve in deep again and say, what am I struggling with, right? What are my weaknesses? And then you go to that point where you say, yeah, now I have to make those decisions, and you have to evaluate the people around you. Like you said, those 5 people. If they're not good for you, if they're dragging you to some way, hey, cut them loose, right? That's also up to you. And it's not a bad thing. And that's why I think, there's a quote by Seneca that I really like in one of his letters to Lucidius, where he's like, the wise man is content with himself, but he doesn't go out of the way to make new friends or to stay into social contact, because we are social beings, but we are fine to be just with ourselves, to be in that solitude, to sit with yourself and have those moments of meditation, journaling, self-reflection, whatever it is that you need. But then you can, if you work from that, then it's easier to cut those people off, which is important, right? As you said, because they can drag you into a direction that you don't want, that is not good for yourself. Knowing what is your best, what you need to work on, and then making sure that the environment that you are in is adhesive or conducive to that works together. And I think that is really important.
Another external aspect that I think influences a lot of people's, visions of themselves and what they view as success and failure is social media. And reading through your website, one of the things that you mention a lot is broicism. And that's something that's become, very popular. It's another thing. We talk about Stoicism getting a bad rap. And I think that's part of it, where it's kind of Stoic values, right? Because, you're Stoic, you don't let things affect you. But then it's this aspect of like having nice cars is a marker of success, having a nice house, being a ladies' man, all of these things that kind of come with the hustle culture mindset that have somehow become intertwined with Stoicism. All of these things influence people's view of what success means. And so you'll have people who are chasing those things, who are chasing cars, goods, any commodity that they think is meaningful and gives them this kind of illusion of success. But then once they get them, they're the same person. And so that's something that I think is remarkably different between people who maybe don't have those things and do, is that there's people who go through these tough situations and they realize something about themselves, then, just gets rid of all of that. And for me, it was back in high school when I thought about what do I want my career to look like. It was, I have these options. Like I've always been big into law and I still plan on doing law. But one of the things about law was like, oh, I'm going to make a lot of money doing it. And the more I kind of researched into that, I was like, I'm going to feel empty. That's going to make me feel empty. I want to make an impact. And so there's something to be said, I think, in terms of the bad rep that Stoicism gets, in terms of that's not what Stoicism is about. Stoicism is not about anything external. So you mentioned the internal solitude and just being content with yourself. I think that's the end result of finding any philosophy of life. It's just being content with yourself, and therefore when you're content with yourself, whether you're driving a beat up like 2000 Honda Civic, you're driving a nice Maserati, you're still happy. And I think that's something that we don't mention enough, is that, friends are important, of course, because they're an external influence, but just what you're consuming and the messaging you're consuming is important as well. And I'd love to hear more about you speak on broicism, because it's very prevalent on the writings you have on Via Stoica. And it's very important to spread in terms of kind of getting those things taken apart, because that's not part of Stoicism.
No, I agree, and there are some things that you can say these are kind of more somewhat aligned with Stoicism. Some people talk about the discipline, and but it's all about the question of why and what is there behind it. And that's the thing. Like I don't have any problem with people going to the gym and working on them physically, but it's about the questions like, why are you doing this? And that is the real key of philosophy, right? The Oracle of Delphi said, know thyself. One of those maxims up there said, know thyself. And this is the thing that we need to do. And, you see some people like, Andrew Tate, they say, oh, use your anger, use that, feed off of it, right? And Seneca goes like, anger is like a momentary insanity, right? It's just like, because if you ask yourself how logical and how tempered can you really act in, this haze of anger, right? So it's all about the why and how you do things, and just to really know what it means to you, right? And when you talk about this, having these external things like fancy cars and a lot of money and all of that stuff, and the Stoics, they don't say like that's bad. Like the Stoics, they don't say, oh, this is, no, you should shun this away. Like Seneca was one of the wealthiest and one of the most influential people of his time. That it's all about what kind of control it has in you, how it influences your identity. So if you say like, I have a lot of money, and you do a good job that is morally right, you get the money in a morally way, then great. But at the one point, if there's money, or we get this question a lot on the spaces, we're like, I want to have this fancy car. Yeah, if you have the money, right, then go for it, But if you are up all night thinking about, oh, this car is going to get scratched, or someone's going to steal it, or, what happens if I lose it, then suddenly that car owns you, right? So when we think about this broicism, they paint this picture of a life that is easily attainable for everybody, but life is difficult, right? It's not this instant gratification thing. And that's some things that I get from these videos and these ways of living, is like, just do as I do, and then you're going to have a great life, or you're going to be a tough guy, or whatever. But it's not addressing the feelings and the emotions that are happening underneath, right? Because for a lot of times it feels like this avoidance. It's like when you mentioned like hitting rock bottom, and okay, now I'm just going to go and hit the gym all the time. Well, maybe at one point that is good, to kind of kickstart things, to eat healthy, to exercise. But you can also go to the extreme. And if you don't work on the why, if you don't work on the really things that underneath it, then it's not going to be this healthy thing. Right, and at the end of the day, just to quote a little bit from Star Wars, there's always going to be a bigger fish, right? And I've lived in Dubai, and it's crazy, man. It's like you make a lot of money, you make good money there, but you spend it so fast, right? Why? Because you're always comparing yourself to someone else. Oh, look at me, I'm driving a Porsche. Well, there goes someone in a McLaren, right? All of this stuff, and it's like there's always someone who is better off. And if you keep living that way, then you're always chasing that moving goalpost, right? Because there's always going to be someone that has something that you want. And that's kind of what I get from that broicism feel. It's not set in the right values. It's not set in the right principles. It's just focused on, just manning up, tough up. Or if you go to the gym and, if you don't have this many women, then, you're not a man. Or if you can't stick up for yourself, then you're not a man. That's not what masculinity means, right? You're a man if you are a strong sense of who you are, you know your boundaries, you know what you need in life, you can support yourself, you can support others, and that is the real sense of a man. And there's so many different ways of exposing that, of being a man. I'm not a muscular guy, I'm like a stick figure person, like muscle wise, but I know who I am, right? And if I need to support someone, I will do whatever it takes to do that, right? I will be there for people if I have to, right? If someone says like, hey, I need you to be there, or if I get into a relationship again, or something happens to my family, I'll be there, right? So it's all about showing the right character in the moment that it matters. And the things that the messages that we see on social media and those influences, a lot of them are mirages, right? Because we don't know what's really going on. Like, again, in Dubai, what people did is they would rent a villa, they would rent a fancy car, to get some fake dollar bills, and they make all those videos. And then people think it's real, right? But it's not. It's just to kind of take money away from people. So yeah, it is a big thing that's happening in Stoicism, that it's kind of like, look at me being the real man. No, it's just being an authentic person. It's not about man or woman, because in those spaces that we have on X, we have so many women joining us and sharing their stories about their journey. It's all about being a good person and about being yourself and being, in touch with who you are. If you need to go to the gym, yeah, great, do it, but do it for the right reasons. If you don't want to go to the gym, don't, right? But take care of yourself, and mentally, physically, it's all a package. But yeah, it needs to come from the right point of view and the right reasons.
It's kind of misportrayed, especially by people with high levels of influence like Tate. And you wrote about this in your article on like, what is the Stoic man? What does it mean to be a Stoic man? Is kindness. That was one of the big things that you touched on. And I think something that, comes directly with kindness is being gentle as well. Being a Stoic man, and Ren and I have talked about this on numerous of our episodes as well. We did a masculinity episode back in season 1. I think it was 14, 15, or 16, one of those two. And the thing about a Stoic man is how he embraces those around him and makes them feel, safe and part of the community. And it's not by force, it's not by acting very strong and I'm not saying men, shouldn't be strong. I think it's very important for men to be very mentally strong and build a mental fortitude. But it's more by being gentle and showing them, like, just because you are, a man, you don't think you're above people. You don't try to be all big macho guy all the time. You're still just a person, and you want your community to feel welcome, because that's what Stoicism is about. That's how it was initially started, was just a small community, and then it expanded and expanded and expanded. And the only way for that to really happen is by, having men who are gentle and who are kind and who are compassionate, who are reliable, who have these levels of self-control, and just building, not to go off on a tangent, but really building off that and making it very applicable today is, you have high levels of domestic violence in households. You have high levels of crime, particularly by men. And it's these acts of violence in our society are committed by men who have no self-control and who don't have the ability to be gentle, who aren't high character. It's all impulsive. It's all, very quick. Like you said, there's delayed gratification. They want this instant gratification. It's the same thing with your impulses, right? If you aren't able to recognize that it's merely an emotion or just a very strong feeling that kind of comes in waves. Sometimes you can feel all the way up here, but in a matter of minutes, you can be back down to a calm sea. And I think building the mental strength to realize that in the moment, it's very easy to see that in retrospect. But when you're actually in the moment where your emotions are so stimulated and you're so angry or you're so passionate about something, it's very hard to sit back for a second and kind of restrain yourself.
Yeah, exactly, and that's where these the virtues come into play, and the temperance, the justice, the wisdom and the courage as well. And it takes far more courage to be in control of yourself. It takes far more exercise to be to not fall into that flow of emotion where it's sometimes anger, grief, and all that things where we just act out of the impulse. And that takes far more strength than just giving in to anger, right? And it's like I hear people say, it's like, no, anger has its benefits. It's like, is it really, like, because if you can't control it, then it just go rampant, right? So even just a little bit, but it can just take you far away from things. And I think that is why, exactly what you said, we need to have that character, we need to build it. And Marcus Aurelius points that out in his book on the first one, where he talks about what he's learned from Antoninus Pius. It starts with compassion, right? It starts with that kindness, first to yourself, but also to other people around you. And that is vital if we want to live in a good society, and if we want to reduce that violence that you've mentioned, right? Because a lot of it is, contributed to men, right? We do that a lot because we are more physical when we are hurt, and our expression, a way of expression, that anger and hurt is more physical. So what does that tell you about someone who does those things? To me, that tells me that they're not fully in control of who they are, that they don't know who they are, right? And I always have the feeling that the people who are the loudest, who are screaming like, this is how you need to do it and all that, they're the most insecure, right? Because they've got so much more to hide and to not show the back of the tongue, or to not be vulnerable. They need to say, oh, look at how I'm living the right life, and I'm screaming it from the top of the hills. While the people who are secure, they don't mind just sitting by themselves. They know exactly what they're doing. They just sit there and just say, okay, this is happening, but they do step up when it's needed. That's, again, acting right in the moment when it is needed. That's when you can really show your yourself and who you are, and that is when the grounded person will really show its true colors. Like, I don't need to be a leader all the time, but if I need to step up, I'll step up. Right, I'll make my decisions, I'll make my choices, and I'll be there. But that doesn't necessarily qualify me as a, if I'm quiet in a room, that doesn't mean anything about me, whether I'm a good man or nothing. By the way, what does that mean, right? Again, we talk about these definitions. So yeah, I agree. We need to have that kindness. We need to have that compassion, first to ourselves and then to others. And if we don't work through those things, then we're just going to keep shouting things to just hide all the insecurities that we have. And that's how I see it. When I listen to someone like Andrew Tate, it's like, man, he's lost, man. There's things that he needs to work on some stuff on himself, or maybe it's just a show. I don't know, but something isn't real, right? There's something missing of authenticity. And if I speak to, for example, my dad is a great example, right? He's a calm guy, but he does things. He gets things done, right? He's there if you need him. And that is something for me is the real masculine person, is like reliable, trustworthy. When you need someone, he's there, true to his word, honor. All of those things are far more, important than having the things and being strong and shouting and all that stuff. No, that's just frivolous kind of stuff, as long as it's not backed up by personality and character.
Yeah, that's what's really funny to me is we see all these kind of manosphere characters who try and define masculinity, and they are these like guys who look like they're on roids and are all jacked up, and then they try and do that to people like Marcus Aurelius, where like what the image of Marcus Aurelius that people would most associate is like him as a ripped like Roman statue, and that was not what he looked like whatsoever. Seneca, same thing. Like you look up Stoic philosopher, and it's like this bald guy, and he's like really jacked, and he's like riding a horse, and that is not what they look like whatsoever. So it's really funny then that we kind of see that trend continue nowadays, where masculine men is like really jacked and muscular and it's very heroic. And I definitely want to look like that. Me and Mateo are both big into the gym, so we're trying to look like that. So there's nothing wrong with that per se, but it's not the mark of masculinity. And I think that's something that's very important to highlight. Is that's why Stoicism is getting tied into this. Is like the Stoic videos that are like 8 Stoic rules for life. It's not that simple. But B, like the thumbnail is like these ripped dudes, and it's not an accurate portrayal whatsoever. And there's a very interesting article I read. I forget if it was Washington Post or New York Times, one of those articles, about the fact that there are a lot of people who are our age and who are younger, who are growing up, and they're looking to define what masculinity is. And I think there's something to be said that masculinity is very subjective. And so I think what we need to focus on is, instead of building up internet role models for what masculinity is or guides for what masculinity is, we should have a few resources and we should let people discover it for themselves, I think is the best way forward. And so I'm just curious, hearing what your perspective is on that, because, Stoicism, I don't think is a means to an end of defining masculinity. It's just a means to an end of defining what a good person is. So I think Stoicism, really ultimately could be removed from the masculinity discussion altogether, and because it just boils down to what is a good person. And if you're a good person, then obviously you're one step closer to being a good man. And so I think that's why Marcus Aurelius says stop arguing about what a good man is and just be one, is that we all want to sit around and say, well, this is a marker of masculinity. No, this trait is. Why don't we just focus on being a good person and then let it go from there?
Yeah, exactly. And it is also sad because a lot of the these thumbnails, and as you said, in Epictetus, he was lame, right? One of his legs wasn't functioning well or whatever, so he wasn't jacked. And as you said, Marcus Aurelius was health-wise was very frail. People didn't even expect him to live this long, right? So I think there is this sense of portrayal that we see these images and think like, oh wow, this is what I've got to look. If I want to have fortitude, if I want to have a great character, then I've got to at least have a six-pack, right? And I'm not saying, again, it's doing exercise, keeping your body, in shape and healthy. That's the way to go, right? But it shouldn't identify who you are. Like, again, the body is an external. Like I was playing, when I was playing in Dubai, we were playing, it wasn't, professional football or soccer, but I was having fun. I was, a little bit, lighter than what I am now. And then suddenly, just with one twist of my leg, it just all, that I was in bed for 6 weeks, right? Having immediate surgery and all that stuff, or my knee done. So it can really go away. But if your identity is connected to that, then you're going to be thrown off guard, right? You're going to be thrown off your kilter from the get-go. So it shouldn't be connected with that. But as you said, it's all about being a good person. And the thing is, especially at certain, points in your life, you are very influenced, right? You can see this life is like, and that's as if you're younger, in your 20s, or even more. Even my part, just making a new company, you need to take risks, right? You need to go for it. You need to say, okay, this is kind of where I want to go, but you need to do it in the right way. And you need to make sure that you are not making decisions that you are going to regret later on, where you're going to look back as like, oh, if I did this, if I wish I didn't do that, or making, alienating yourself from people who do mean well, and all that stuff. So you need to make sure that you're making the right decisions, even at an early stage, and understanding that these externals are just here on a loan, right? If you get a lot of money, it can be gone within an instant. But if you know who you are, and that's why I like what you brought up, to just be a good person, that's what it's all about. And whether it's masculinity, feminism, all of that stuff, those are just labels that we throw on stuff, right? That's just like to kind of push people in a little box. But you can say to yourself, it's like, I don't care about those labels. I'm just going to make sure that I know who I am, that I have my values straight, and I'm going to be the best version of me and the best person that I can be. And that's all you've got to focus on. And those other labels, just let them fly. If you see this influencer, that's why it is so difficult, right? With all the algorithms, all these things are just so stacked against us, because they can tell you exactly, they know more about you within 5 minutes than you know about yourself. Because you're just scrolling. Oh, I watched one golf clip because I thought I was playing some golf in Dubai. I don't know how to play golf. Like, I just did a driving range, and now I see all these videos come by. It's like, what is this? What's going on? So they know about all the things, and even those things where you sometimes like, did I even look that up, or did I say that, or did I think that? And suddenly you see an ad. So we are just, we're so stacked against all of these things, these algorithms and these influences from outside, that we have to make that stronger sense of who we are. And that is really key. So I like what you said. It's all about us being a good person, not about this masculinity thing, or people telling us, oh, you're weak. You're if you, for example, cry as a man, or if you have vulnerabilities and all that stuff, they will tell you you're weak. It's like, well, I'm working on myself, right? And I'm a lot stronger than someone who just pushes that stuff away and ignores it, right? So there is that sense of, again, we need to do the hard work. Life isn't easy. Life is a tough journey. And the faster you start putting your shoulders under the hard work, which is yourself, then you can really grow, and you can make those strides, and you can do all the things with the right reasons. You can go to the gym because you say, I want to be physically fit because it makes me feel good about myself, but I don't need it to be, to identify myself as who I am, because that is something completely different.
We did an episode a while ago on labels and how labels restrict the potential of what things can be or what they can turn into. And I think this is a great example, right? Like, we have these labels of, masculine features or feminine features and whatnot. And the thing about, and Ren honestly hit it right, hit the nail on the head with Stoicism. It's a guide to be a better person. It's not a guide to be a better man or a better woman. Because I was thinking about it. I mean, if you think about it, right, and you're like, if I have a son or if I have a daughter, I mean, regardless, that shouldn't influence how you raise them. You should still raise them with the same basic, fundamental morals and values, and you should instill those into your family. And that should be really the core of how you act as a family and how you act in your community. And, the 4 pillars of Stoicism, the 4 cardinal virtues, are really the best way to do that, right? Wisdom, justice, temperance, and courage. Those are 4 things that any person can have. It's not, men have to be, courageous, and women have to, stay home and they don't really need to be courageous. No, if I have a strong son, I want a strong daughter too. I want a strong family. I want a family that is built on strength and all of us are courageous in our own ways, because it's going to look different for everybody. Now, there's certainly things to be said where, we sort of, not gender roles, but I guess traits that we can use to describe certain people that could be good or bad, right? We don't want a society that's promoting being weak mentally. We don't want a society that's promoting people falling into the victim mentality, right? And that, like, the reason I say traits and not gender roles is because that can be men and women both promoting these traits that are really hindering our society. As one of the big reasons we started this podcast is actually because we see our generation specifically kind of heading in this downhill trajectory mentally. We have the wrong mentality in life where we're comfortable. And like you were talking about the book from Viktor Frankl, where you have those the discomfort that is involuntary discomfort. We don't really have that. in this generation. We have it good. I mean, we got roofs over our head. I've got my AC on right now. I've got food in the fridge. I'm good. All my basic necessities are taken care of. Now, like you said, you have these things like the Great Depression or the concentration camps, things that happen to people. So Ren, whenever anybody says Viktor Frankl, I immediately look at Ren and wait for that smile to come across his face because it's one of his favorite modern philosophers. But the thing that's amazing about Viktor Frankl is he went through arguably one of the worst situations that any human could be put into, and he is living proof demonstrating that implementing Stoic values into your life can not only get you through it, but make you a far better person after.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what it's all about. Again, to have those things to fall back on, because life can be, you think about the song of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, it can turn upside down real quickly, right? And I think that is something that we've got to keep in mind. Like we have to, and that's where it kind of, to have a really strong sense of gratitude and what you are doing right now and what you have, all the things, like you said, we have, we are fortunate, right? The three of us here, if I, what you mentioned there, and I'm very fortunate to have all the things that I have right now. But there's so many people, even in our world today, who don't have the basic needs met. And we just take them for granted, right? We are like whenever you go to a new place, the first thing people ask for if you go on a holiday is like, what is the Wi-Fi? Right? That's nowadays, that's the number one priority that we have. And we've had some issues with the video stream here, right? It's like where I had to change from device and a different camera. And I was thinking about that as well. It's like, this is stoicism in action, right? You just go with the punches, you deal with it, and this is what it is, right? But people can then get so upset with it. And I was in Panama before, a month or so ago, visiting some friends there, and I stayed there for a while by myself on a coffee farm. And then suddenly electricity went out for a weekend. From Friday evening until Sunday evening, I didn't have electricity, right? So there was no internet. There was nothing else for me to do. I just, ended up reading, having like little, a church or a little fireplace going, and just, you just do other stuff. Nowadays, it is such a detriment to our to mental health if these things are gone, and suddenly we're thrown off completely, right? It's like we can't deal with life anymore because we don't have these normal things that we expect to be basic needs, because we take them for granted. And I think that's also another great lesson of Stoicism, is to practice that gratitude, to just take a moment to reflect on where I am right now, here and now, and then you just see, okay, I've got a lot of skills, and I like what you said. They're not focused on the sexes or on the genders or whatever. It's all about us, who we are as a human, right? We can all have those things. And when you talk about courage isn't, obviously there are, the first responders, and they're trained so heavily, they know exactly what to do. They just do it, right? And that is also a way to kind of take out that fear, because they have fear, right? Even the soldiers, right? If I watched Band of Brothers the other day now with the 80th anniversary of D-Day and all that stuff, there was a lot of fear going on. Can you imagine being in a foxhole, being shelled by all those things? But it's about training. It's about preparing yourself mentally for things that are happening. And that's what the Stoics do, right? That's what Stoicism is about. And then you have that courage to go again, to really ask those difficult questions and to prepare yourself, to have, for example, negative visualization. Say, okay, what if all these things go wrong? What will I do then? What is the worst that can happen to me right now? Think about that for a second, and then see, like, can I really survive this? Yes, we can. But we have to have that mental fortitude. I like how you said that, and that's sometimes missing, right? Where it's just like the smallest thing that doesn't go our way because, oh, look at, I'm the most important person in the world. Everything needs to go exactly how I planned it. That's just not how life works. So we have to prepare ourselves for those things and to be grateful for being here right now and having the things that we have. I think that will really help us, when we go to difficult things or when we have to say goodbye to things, then at least we've had them and we've used them in the moment. Like Epictetus says in one of his books, when you whisper your child good nights, when you kiss your child good night, whisper, tomorrow you will die. Right? And that sounds very morbid, but that is a lesson of being grateful. It's like, tomorrow you could be gone, right? I could be gone tomorrow. So let me at least, be here in the moment now instead of focusing on all these other things and then maybe 5 years down the road regret that I didn't spend any time with the loved ones or, myself. And I think that is another key lesson to be able to deal with all those difficult things, is to really live in a moment and to say, I've got all of the things right now that I need to give me the good life that I deserve.
Yeah, technology, I believe, has certainly conditioned a lot of people to just expect everything to be handed to them. Oh, if I don't know something, I'm just going to look it up on my phone. Like, I got it. And so, it's really funny you mentioned the technical problems we had today. I always think about how our very first episodes we were filming, like, it took us all day to record them because we couldn't figure out the technology, and we were really frustrated, and you're like, is this how it's going to always be? And just to think back at, like, how silly it was that we were so worried about technology versus, like, just spreading the message and things like that. And we kind of get caught in this trap. And I think Stoicism is a very effective solution to that. An underrated aspect of Stoicism is its influence on CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT is very prevalent in the mental health field nowadays in the Western world, and it's been proven to be effective. If you don't want to go through the whole therapy aspect, you just take aspects of Stoicism that are inherent in CBT and you apply it to your everyday life. Like you said, gratitude, fortitude, challenging yourself mentally to, cut out things that, say, maybe I don't need this for a day. Maybe I don't need my phone for a day. Just living that life so that you become deconditioned, right? So that you aren't reliant inherently on your technology, so that you aren't frustrated when, the electricity goes out or your Wi-Fi goes out or something's not working. You don't just melt and you don't fall apart because, it's really funny to compare, because a lot of those people who were on the beaches of Normandy, they were 18, they were 19, they were people who were our age, and you compare them now to people who flip out when they're like, oh my God, my phone doesn't have service, what's going on? It's just very, it's very funny to compare the two, and you have older people who are like, oh, the teenagers of today would never be able to do that. And I actually reject that. I believe that, teenagers are just as resilient nowadays as they were 60 years ago. They're just conditioned to not, really act on it. And so the more they use their technology, the more we kind of get ingrained in this saying X, Y, and Z can do this for me rather than me thinking about it or doing it. Then we become less resilient. And then we're used to not being resilient whatsoever. And it really does us a disservice. So that's why we're really advocates. It's, great to hear that in lieu of electricity you read. We're very big advocates of reading books. And I think that's A, to get you offline, and B, just to, become reflective. Books can be a meditative exercise. And so anything that you can do to kind of implement what Matteo said with fortitude, Benny, you're talking about with gratitude, and just get yourself away from that conditioning of everything's handed to me, every difficulty that I have, I need something else external to solve it. Anything that you can do to get away from that mindset is extremely beneficial, especially in younger ages where we never grew up not having technology, so we never had to figure anything out for ourselves because we always had some kind of aid. It's going to just become even more important. And I think that's why we love podcasts. Obviously we like our podcasts, and then we love podcasts that are similar vein because they talk about this and they say, we need to figure out how to have more fortitude and ultimately be more grateful for the basic necessities that a lot of Western countries, like, it's just automatic and we don't have to fight for any of those things.
Yeah, and it's not a bad thing, technology. I love technology, right? Google is like, my best friend, and he worked as a translator at one point with a tech, programming department. And they told me they use Google for everything, right? If they have a problem in the code that they don't know to solve, just Google it. Right, and it's not a bad thing, and I'm just saying that because also the other side, people give technology a bad rap to say, oh, it should all be gone. No, we should all be able to use it in the right way, and there's a lot of things that we can discover and advance our lives once you start to. And I have this calculator example where just a simple calculator where if someone has been asked like, hey, what is 5 plus 5? And the first thought goes out to where is my calculator instead of trying to solve it for yourself. That is kind of the how the mind then focuses to externals where I need the help. Well, if you just sit with yourself, you can figure things out a little bit more, right? And it's that easy out. That easy out is just like, oh, let me just go for technology, or just let me find the answer there. And we do need to let our brains work. Like, that's why reading is important. That's why having conversations is important about these kind of topics, right? And sometimes that I feel the missing in most generations, where we can't have, like we talked about a little bit before, that disagree to agree to disagree, because they can't have those conversations anymore because they're difficult. They make me feel uncomfortable. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do the hard work. And that's the thing that we need to get over. Like, no, you need to do the hard work in life, right? There's going to be difficult times, and that's why if you are preparing yourself for, a job outside of after college or whatever, they're not going to always be nice. They're not always going to say, sorry, you made a mistake. No, they're going to tell you off, right? Again, so we need to prepare ourselves for those things, and we need to make sure that we are ready for it. And then it's up to you, right? Then it's you. Is like, okay, I made a mistake. Let me just own up to it. Let me just say, okay, I made a mistake. I'm going to make it. I'm going to fix it, or I'm just going to make sure that it doesn't happen again, or just try to improve and learn from it. And that's how we can really grow as people. And I agree. Nowadays the younger generations. I'm 40. But I don't see myself as that old. I don't know why, but it's but they get a rap as like, they don't know how to do. They're useless. Look, they're always on the gadgets. I think adults, like I'm saying adults, but older people, they're more on their phone. Like if I look at my mom, she's on her phone a lot. It's like. So it's easy to get in, again, because it's a trap. It's all geared against us, right? It's so easy to kind of get distracted from life. So as you said, it's all up to us as an individual to make sure that we are strong in our minds, that we know how to deal with these things. Yeah, use your phone, use the technology to your benefit, but don't make it such a big part of you that you can't live without it. That's why reading and just setting it apart is a good thing, is a good way, is a good practice to see where you stand.
And this kind of goes back to what you were saying about instant gratification. But I think the reason that a lot of people say, our generation's doomed and that, we're weaker than every other generation. Well, one, it's because we grew up in the world that we did. We grew up in a world that, the generations before us strived for. They strived to make us comfortable so we wouldn't have to go through the struggles that they did, which is great. But that's kind of the product of living in a time where there's not really a lot of struggle. Is now we're not going to have to continue that trend. And now we're going to kind of plateau, and then we're going to see it go down a little bit and then come back, right? It's kind of this cycle. But it's not that we're incapable of it. It's because we weren't used to it. And so the thing that's tough is, one, with instant gratification, we're used to seeing everything like that. We're used to seeing change just like that. And if the only way that our generation is really going to, I guess, bounce back per se, is it's going to take a lot of time for the majority of our generation to really dive into the introspection and to finding out who they are and purposely putting themselves into difficult situations to challenge themselves and to build them up, right? And now, like Ren said, there's sort of a threshold that you have to be careful of. You don't want to chase, always be challenging yourself with every single thing. That's a bit crazy. But you definitely don't always want to be sitting on your phone being comfortable either, because then you're never going to build resilience. Now, one thing I think is great for our generation is we're seeing a lot of younger people starting to travel more. We're seeing a lot of younger people sort of, I guess, live the hippie lifestyle. It's like, I'm just going to live out of a van and, drive across the country, or I'm just going to, spend all my money and go to Europe and see what happens. That's honestly great. There are so many benefits to that. And the reason being, I just went to Europe for the first time recently in early May. And the thing about social media is we sort of have this painted picture of the world. I thought I knew kind of what the world was like in all these areas. I'd seen videos of, Spain and Italy or Dubai, and I was like, I get the picture. And then I actually went, and I was like, wow, that's very different. And there's so many things that, even though we think we're connected on social media, we actually can't really grasp unless we're there. And I know that's something you really wanted to touch on, was travel and the importance of traveling. And I feel like, especially at a young age, immersing ourselves, in different cultures and different environments and surrounding ourselves with different philosophies is so important. So I'd love to hear your opinion on traveling as a whole, but, its benefits, its cons, and just overall.
Yeah, and just to kind of come back as well, before, I think, the difficulty of life kind of changes, right? Like back in the day, like my parents didn't have a lot of options or choices, right? For them, it was just like, we need to work, we need to make money to survive, right? But now, and even for me, right, we are in a situation where we have all these options, right? And that's really overwhelming. So if you are, I don't know, when I was like 15 or 16, I kind of had to make a decision of what career I wanted to go and do, right? And again, I studied tourism, then I became an English teacher. Now I'm, doing life coaching, working on myself, philosophy. You can always change and do these things, but the pressure now on especially your generation is like there's so many options, and it's this trap to set yourself up for like, am I making the right decision? So there is more need for to think about who am I, what am I doing, because before it was just like it was simple. You just had to work, make money, work, survive. And I was like, how can I thrive? That surviving part is done, but how can I flourish as a person? And that's where all these insecurities come from, because of all these influences, because of all these kind of picture perfect lives that we see. And we see only the great things in people's Instagram accounts, especially with the travel stuff, but we don't see what's happening behind it. So it is, in a sense, it is more difficult, and it is more difficult on a far more fundamental level of who you are as a person. So that is something that, when the changes are so fast that you don't know, decision you make now, how well is that going to happen in 5 to 10 years? So there's a lot of difficulties there. But I think, as you mentioned, traveling, I'm traveling at the moment. I quit my job a few years ago. Now I'm house sitting, pet sitting, going in Ecuador at the moment and just kind of moving along. But it teaches you so much about yourself, because you do get to go into those uncomfortable moments. You do get to put yourself in worry and not knowing what's going to happen, where you're going to land, and the money or the food, or how am I going to travel? How am I going to take a bus? Or is it safe? Or can I speak to people who is there, right? But the more you put yourself in a situation, the more you realize that you can, again, rely on yourself to deal with those things. And even if things go wrong, then you just adapt, right? I think that is one of the strongest things that we have as humans, that we are far better at adapting than we think. Change is, the Stoics talk about that change is the only constant. Marcus Aurelius talks about change all the time. And if you put yourself in that travel mode, then you're gonna face change so much faster. I like it. I need that kind of uncomfortable feeling, but it's also, again, doing it for the right reason. One of the quotes by Seneca that really changed my mind is like, why am I doing this thing? This traveling was, you wonder your travels do you no good when you're saddled with the very thing that is, disturbing you, which is yourself. So I was asking myself, am I running away? Am I escaping things? What is it that I'm really doing? And now it's like, it's enriching my life. As you mentioned, right? You go to Europe, you see different culture, you see different, food, different styles of living, different ways of public transportation. I like the US, but I was in Bend 2 years ago and visiting my friend there. And as I like to walk, so I was walking, on the sidewalk, and I'm pretty much the only one who's walking, right? Because it's all by cars, and I felt like people think I'm a bum or something, what's going on here? And that's why I'm not a very fashionable guy, so I was wearing like a beanie, just like baggy clothes, a little old backpack. Is like, that's kind of, my beard was scruffy and all that stuff. Then you just like, yeah, and when you go to Europe, everybody walks, right? In the Netherlands, I'm from the Netherlands, everybody rides a bike. When we were 8, my parents just like, here's a bike, go to school, good luck, and make sure you come back safe and all that stuff. There is a different way of doing things, and once you get to see that, you get to become such a more complete person, because you can see that there's more ways that we can live life, right? Different religions, different cultures. And at the ground of everything, we can see that everybody wants the same, to have a good and peaceful life for themselves and for their loved ones. And that's something that we can really then, build on to use that sense of like, okay, I want to live my life, but there's so many different ways of living, but at the core, it's all the same. And again, that's why we could come more together as a people, right? As humanity, to say we all want the same, to have a peaceful life. So why can't we just work on that a little bit more?
Yeah, the Stoic concept of the cosmopolis and being a cosmopolitan, I think relates very closely to travel, because we can see these things, we can watch videos, we have so many resources that are pretty useful. They're pretty cool. It's awesome that I can watch a video of some European city on my phone sitting here in Colorado. But at the same time, it doesn't paint that real picture, and you have to get an understanding of the people. Like those videos, you can get an understanding of the city and what it looks like, and like the nature and all of those aspects. But what really drives the city, the society, is the people that make it up. And so to really truly experience that, you have to go talk to them. That's something we've advocated for here on the podcast, is just putting yourself in other people's shoes and being able to be empathetic without really compromising your values is something that's a skill. It's really a skill if it boils down to it, and it's something that we all need to be able to have, because we certainly have a lack of empathy here in the United States and a lot of other places in the world, and we need to build that by just putting ourselves in other people's shoes. And the way that we do that is just kind of plopping ourselves in that situation and adapting, like you said, going in there with like a script of like, this is how I want my vacation to go. It works, if you're going to the beach and, you have 4 kids or something like that, you probably need a little bit of an itinerary or else it's a complete mess. But you can't, script out the experience and the experiences and the culture that you learn, because once you're there, it just kind of hits you. That's something that, I've gone to Mexico and the Caribbean, and, those are the things that really sat with me, is just the locals and like the culture. That's the unique aspect about it. And so building up that kind of Stoic idea of just a cosmopolitan society, one society that kind of serves each other, is for that peaceful life, like you mentioned. And we have people who kind of want to sit in their bubbles and like only experience the local community that they're comfortable with. And I think you need to push the boundaries a little bit and be uncomfortable with the people around you a little bit, because then you kind of are malleable and you say, like, I can check what my values are, because that's another important aspect, I think, is different cultures have different values. And so, whether it's online feedback that you're checking your values, or you're going to a different country and you're speaking with the locals and you're like, wow, they really value family in a different sense here. Like, maybe I should consider some of that. I think is another underrated aspect of travel that's kind of missed, is just the fact that you get to kind of assess those values, because I'm speaking from like a philosophical sense here. If we were to compare like Stoicism to Confucianism, very different values there. And it's not one's inherently wrong and one's inherently right. It's just we have to try them out for ourselves and see which one most closely aligns with us. And so that's another, value of travel that I've noticed from my experiences.
Yeah, and those are excellent points, right? And still, at the end of the day, we are far more similar than we think. Even like if we look at animals, when dog sitting and you can see them yawning, you can see them sighing, the features that they have, we are far more similar to the animals as well than we think. But human race, we are pretty much the same, right? Again, we are. We have different values, different ways of living, but really getting to know them and getting to live there and seeing how other people live, and not having that instant judgment that what they do is wrong or what they do is crazy. Oh, like there's a Michel de Montaigne, who was a 16th century philosopher. He wrote on the voyages, like I don't think it was Columbus, but Americus or someone else, that they made to South America. And, a lot of his contemporaries, they said like, oh, look at those savages, look at how they live. And he looked at it as like, let's really look at how they live, right? And it's like, they are far more sophisticated than we are, because they value, the family, their nature, they do everything in line with their, yes, they have different customs. Yes, they do things in a different way, but is that really bad, right? And nowadays it does feel like whatever is unknown to us is bad. Like whatever like people do in a different way. Like again, my ex was from Morocco. I went to Morocco many times, right? I went to a mosque. I saw how they pray and the community that they have there. So I've seen how in Islam how it's done. Like we had a wedding celebration in Morocco, and her family invited all of my family at their home, and they cooked food. They made homemade food, couscous, and it was great. And they eat with their hands, and my family wasn't really used to that, but they tried. Right? I was like, hey, let's try, let's see how this works. And it was such a great unification of just two different cultures, where in the Netherlands, Moroccans, they have a bad connotation. It's a bad name. It's like, oh, they're, especially the men, they're criminals, but they're set aside in the society because of that judgment that we have on, oh, they do bad things, they have bad values, they have bad ways of living, bad traditions, because they're different to ours. But if you really go and live and spend time with them, you see that they are different, but they come from the right intentions and they come from the right way. And that's where travel can really open your mind up. And again, when you look at the news and the US, but I used to watch CNN and all that stuff a lot back in the day in the Netherlands as well. And then you have one centric view in the world. But if you see the views from different people and you listen to them, you see that there's more to it, right? And it expands yourself. And then you truly become that cosmopolitan person where you say, okay, let me just go and see what it's like. Try the food, live there, be there for a while. And if I don't like it, yeah, that's also a great thing to have. You don't have to like everything, but it's not necessary then that you just label things as bad and treat it with disrespect. You just respect it, but you say, yeah, this is not for me. Yeah, great. So you go somewhere else and you move on.
I think that's especially prevalent for us because we live in a pretty small town, like a small area where it's pretty Everyone who lives here they may leave and go to a different part of Colorado or something else, but no one really gets out of here. And that's not necessarily because they can't, it's because they choose not to. Certainly some aspects affect people being unable to leave and whatnot. But I think traveling doesn't have to start big. It doesn't have to be like your first trip. Go to Africa, go to Europe, go to Asia. It's maybe for college, or maybe why don't you try going out of state? Or even if you don't go out of state, maybe go a couple hours away from home, not a 30-minute drive up north, and then you come back on the weekends all the time. And that was the thing for a lot of people that I know, is they say, let's just get out of here. And if you don't like it, you can move back, but at least you tried. It's something where you can't really say anything bad about it. Like you just mentioned, if you go and you don't like it, you can still respect it, but at least you have the experience to say, well, it's not for me. Something else I found really interesting about travel was how, and like you mentioned, how similar we are to people. Is when I met these people in Italy, and I met this girl from Germany, or people from all over Europe, and we were all almost the exact same. We knew a lot of the same things, like we were updated on the same news and whatnot. But also there were kids from my school who were from India, and I was talking to them. I was like, what is the news system like over in India? Like, how do you view America? Because America definitely has its views about India, and they're pretty fixed. There's not a lot of, it's very rigid. And they were like, well, in India, we see everything. We're told everything that even Americans aren't told about America, because the news that they have there is relatively holistic. And I find it very interesting, because talking to these people who grow up in areas that, at least in America, we have our very rigid views on, and they're like, oh no, actually we know all of this about you guys, but you don't know any of this about us. We're like, okay, like that's cool, you know what I mean? And then we can learn about that. Another thing regarding similarities, and this is more within philosophy, is with the guests that we've had on previously as well, who specialize in different areas or who were in different fields. I mean, the most recent one we had on, his name was Ryan. He was a younger guy. He was really into like the psychology field and the neuroscience. And there are so many similarities between Stoicism and psychology and neuroscience, believe it or not. And it's kind of crazy to see all these parallels, because I feel like everyone who is in this realm of philosophy or studying how we think and human nature is ultimately aimed towards the same conclusion and the same goals, but the paths to get there are very different. And I think that's the beautiful thing about philosophy as a whole, and the study of human nature, is because we are all so similar. It doesn't matter if you're studying Eastern philosophy or Western philosophy or psychology, we're ultimately coming to the same conclusions and making the same connections, just in different forms.
Yeah, exactly. There is no right way, right? There is only the way that we have to walk. Again, that's why, we mentioned earlier, it's not necessary to turn people into Stoics, but it is important to start thinking about your life and to start thinking about yourself, asking yourself those questions and finding a way. And there's different ways to do that, right? Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, psychology, religion, right? All of these things, if you are making sure that you are becoming a better person because of it, then yes, you are using this, right? You're using it to your benefit and getting out of those dark, deep moments of life that we've mentioned before. But then it's all this journey, right? And there's no one way to go about it. And this is what we always talk about in the spaces where people come up. It's like, oh, do this, and the same thing with diets, right? I've had many people that say, I do intermittent fasting. That's what you've got to do. That will help you, all of that stuff. And then I try it, and like, for example, I did the Ramadan, I don't know if you know, like the fasting with the Ramadan and for 30 days. And yeah, I did it. It was a nice challenge for me, but it's not something that really works for me. So the intermittent fasting, it just doesn't work for me. But I can, maybe take some larger gaps between meals, or maybe eat a little bit less, right? So even with diet, I always like diet as an example because it's so pushed on people. But you've got to experiment, right? You've got to make sure that this is something that works for you. Try things, right? Be curious to see what works. Yeah, let me try this diet. Let me try intermittent fasting, and then tweak it. Right, because at the end of the day, this is our journey to go on. Let me study philosophy. Let me study psychology. Let me do all these things and just mix that, knowledge together and just see how I use it best for myself. Again, there is no single path to the happy life, but it's all about just making sure that it works for you. And The same thing with travel, right? As you said, I come up from a small, tiny village in the Netherlands where most of, my family, they don't travel either. The people from the village, they still live there, right? Maybe they've gone to some European countries, which is kind of similar to going to different states, I guess, in the US. But yeah, just going into that uncomfort is necessary sometimes to see who you are, right? Again, to kind of have those, and these are kind of the voluntary discomforts what the Stoics talk about. Sometimes you need to put yourself in that situation to see how you deal with these things, and also to have that gratitude for what you have. But exploring those things just a little bit, that can really help you get out of who you are. And again, one of the things that I did when I started traveling, I was like telling people around me, it's like, you have to travel, this is the best way to live. And at one point I realized, like, no, it's my way to live, right? It's not for me to tell them, like, oh, if you don't travel, you're going to miss out on life. No, some people, they do need to stay where they are. And that's how they thrive. That's how they live, right? That's the way they live. And that's great. So everybody has their own way of living. And yeah, there's a lot of, similarities and a lot of ways of doing this. And you just have to find your own. And that's the beauty of life as well. Life is a big experiment. And if we say, like, oh, this is it, this is the solution, then, why should we keep living? It's just like, no, try, experiment, see what works for you, and enjoy that journey as well. It's not about the goal, right? It's and I don't know if you've read the book by Bruce Lee, Be Water, My Friend. It's a really cool one. And he's also all about the journey. It's not about the goal, right? That goal is not going to instantly turn you into a better person. It's all the work that you do up towards it.
Yeah, travel is one of my favorite examples of how, money is a topic that is a preferred indifferent, right? We all want a little bit of money so that we can live, but it's about that why. You keep mentioning, the why. And what we've come to conclude on this podcast is that money is never a tool for happiness or to, change your situation, but it's a tool to provide you experiences that can inform how you are happy, right? And travel, I think, is a really good example of that, right? You have to have a little bit of finances, obviously you can kind of figure it out, but you have to have a little bit of saved up to be able to travel the world. And so it's that financial aspect that allows you the experiences so that you can, learn how to be happy, learn how to be content, and learn from these cultures. But it's not like it's the money that's making you happy. It is those experiences. So that's one thing I love mentioning about travel. It's one of those things that kind of proves our personal point about money is that, it doesn't make you happy, but it will provide you a lot of experiences that can inform how you get there.
Yeah, and money is a topic that I love to talk about, the financial freedom, investing and doing all of that stuff. But that was one of the things that I did in Dubai, where I saw the real value of money is like when you know how to use it in the proper way, and not just like as a way to show off. No, but I started saving there. I started learning about investing. I started learning about what money really means to me, really getting a close idea of like how much I have, my financial status. And then, with one of the things with money, the more money you have, the less creative you become. Because then if you have a problem, you just throw money at it. It's like, I don't need to think about this. A little bit what we talked about with technology, right? But then if you don't have the money, when you do want to do things, you will find ways to do them. Like I love traveling, right? But I'm also working on building a company, which doesn't, at the beginning give you all the incomes that you need. But there are ways to do it. Like I'm a house and pet sitting, right? I've been doing this for almost 2 years. And so I don't spend money on rent. I love, hanging around with animals in great places. I'm sorry you can't see the view, but I'm overlooking like this mountain range in Ecuador. I'm from this tiny village. Who would have thought that I could be there, right? I've been in Mexico, Costa Rica, Panama, all of those places. And the US, I've done house sitting. So if you don't have the money, you will find ways to do things. Having money is important, right? Because that's just how the world works. We need money, so we need to work, we need to do the things. But a lot of people are trapped, for example, in a job because they value money more than they value their lives. Where they say like, oh, I need to have this money because I need to pay my mortgage, I need to pay my car, I need to have these standards for life. And then you become a slave to those ideas, where if you are really, hurting in your job and you're really stuck, there's always a choice, right? And that's what people, they forget about that. You always have a choice. You can quit, you can take a different job that maybe earns less, but where you are more happy. And, think about how much time we spend on our work, and if you have to kind of now go and decide about your career, don't just focus on where you can make the most money, or maybe, have a plan where you say, like when I went to Dubai, I lived there for 5 years. My first year was kind of like, you getting stuck into that pool. But after that, it's like, no, I've got to have a plan, right? I know where I want to be in after these 5 years. I want to be able to quit this job and live this kind of life. So I'm going to have to save up money, and read and work, write and work on myself a lot. That's what I did, which was far more valuable than the money that I made. But I started saving. So if you are starting to work on your career and thinking it out, have a solid plan. Think about, okay, I'm going to work for 5 to 10 years, make this much money, save this much money, and after 5 to 10 years, I can give myself the freedom to decide if I want to continue with this job or if I want to take time off and find something else, reschool, do all of those things. So yeah, money is a great tool, but we need to have a better relationship with it that is more healthy and more stable, that it can work in our benefit, and that we're not just chasing it, but that, even better if it can work for us, that would be the best way to have it.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, Ren and I talk about it all the time. We live in the unfortunate reality where you have to buy your way out of your way to freedom, essentially. Yeah, you have to buy your house. You have to have enough money that you can travel. You have to have enough money to where you don't have to worry about work, that you can just do things with your family and do things for yourself. And it's tough because one thing that we're facing now that other generations didn't, well, to this extreme, I would say that we've been, is just the increasing cost of living and the not increasing as much cost of or the wages, right? So the wages aren't really increasing as much as the cost of living, and so that's tough. That's something that we're dealing with. You see older kids living with parents still, 23, 24, because it's so hard to afford rent. But I think you make a great point about the relationship we have with money, because Stoics weren't concerned with material riches in any way. We just recently did that episode on Stoic minimalism and what the minimalist Stoic mindset would look like. And it has nothing to do with material possessions. Everything is about the actual value of the things that we have and its quality over quantity and whatnot. And so with everything, from knowing yourself and traveling and taking responsibility and everything that you've mentioned, and we've talked about more than traveling, and the things that you should do, and like you said, with money and all of these things. If you had to give one final piece of advice for our generation specifically, what would it be?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and to think about. And when you talk about minimalism, when I left Dubai, I sold everything. Right now, everything that I own fits in my backpack, and I can travel around with it. Right, and for me, that was the most freeing idea of what freeing feeling that I've had, because you don't have to own a house, right? We are kind of, forced on this trajectory of life where you have to finish college, you have to have a house, a family, you have to own a house, and then a great car and all these things, all these possessional things to make sure that you are living, the perfect life. But if I were to give like an advice, if I were to go back to when I was 20, and say like, okay, how do I do this thing? Just sit down and see what's really important to you. That's what it all comes down to, right? All these external things, ask yourself the questions like, what does this mean to me? Does this really make me a better person? Does it make me a better, live a better life? Do I need to have this house? Just focus on what you need first, the most important things, have your priorities straight, and just, live from a sense of gratitude. I think that is the main thing that you want to have. Be grateful for what you have right now. Live it mindfully, be in the present, all of that great stuff, but be there. Just live it now, and don't worry too much about making wrong decisions, right? All of that is just lessons. Just do stuff, just live your life and listen to your gut feeling and your instinct, to like that little voice that tells you, I've got to do this. But then the fear comes up. It's like, no, but what if this happens? Like, don't worry about it. You have time to recover, and you have time to make to change or whatever if it's needed, but listen to your instinct, listen to who you really are, and follow that, and just have the courage to make those decisions.
Awesome. Well, very well worded. We're coming up on 2 hours. Benny, if you have anything else you want to add, you can go ahead, but I think we're good to wrap up.
Yeah, same here. There was a great conversation. We touched on so many things. Yeah, hopefully I got a lot from it. It's such a great day, to hear your perspective and to see Stoicism from your side and from your view and how it affects you and, in your generation. That's why I think it's awesome what you guys do, and to share this message to more people, to have this, a philosophy of life. I think, that would be the best advice to give again, to make sure that you create that for yourself. So you do a great job here, and yeah, I think more people, the more people who listen here, the more people get to live a better life.
Yeah, thank you for that. We'll link, Benny, your website and the podcast in our description of this episode. Again, Benny is the co-host of the Street Stoics, so if you enjoyed this conversation, I'm sure you'd enjoy listening to his podcast, so be sure to go check that out. And if you are looking for life coaching, Via Stoica offers life coaching services, so go and check that out. That'll all be in our description if you want to look at any of those services, intrigued about learning more about Benny. With that being said, this has been this week's episode of the Gen Z Stoic. We thank Benny for being on here, and be sure to tune in again next week as we interview more interesting Stoic perspectives.